I'm not a vegetarian, but I absolutely love a good minestrone or vegetable soup. There's no real fixed recipe for vegetable soup or minestrone. So it's just a matter of personal preference of which vegetables you add and your cooking method. Minestrone in particular has some variations that includes adding meat chunks, usually pork, broth bones, meat-based broth like chicken or beef, and pasta. Vegetable soup is just what it says, it's made from vegetables. There are some basic vegetables that I think are essential in a tasty and nutritious vegetable soup. So let's start with the basics. Onions, carrots, celery, potatoes, zucchini, green beans, cabbage, and I tend to use red cabbage because I prefer the richer flavour and the great colour it puts into the soup. Silverbeet or your favourite green leafy vegetables, tomatoes, and cannellini beans. Now, I tend to chop all these vegetables by hand because I'm looking for a specific size and shape in my vegetables. What I'm aiming for with the hard vegetables is square pieces around 1 centimetre square or just under ½ inch square. With the leafy vegetables, I tend to cut the cabbage into strips around 2 to 3 centimetres long and about 1 centimetre wide. The silverbeet I tend to make a bit longer since it wilts completely when it's cooked and adds a bit of difference to the spoonful. The reason I cut the vegetables like this is because I like to be able to fit quite a few vegetable pieces onto my spoon when I'm eating it. So uncooked, a spoonful of vegetables looks like this. When it's cooked and you get a nice random selection of vegetables and the broth, it looks a bit like this. Now, if you don't like the idea of spending a bit of time chopping vegetables, go ahead and use a food processor and get the pieces to the size and shape you like. It doesn't really matter if you prefer big pieces or tiny pieces, it all tastes good in the end. If you prefer more of a puree type of soup, then cook the soup and blend it with a food processor or a stick blender after the soup is cooked. So back to the preparation. Wash the vegetables and cut off all the bits that need to be cut off, like the bean ends and the unsightly bits from any of the other vegetables. I tend to cook my bolognese sauce, chili and vegetable soup in my favourite pot, which spans 2 burners on my stovetop. So my pot is probably larger than most people's pots, but as I said, I try and cook more meals, and this vegetable soup freezes really well, so I can have a lot of meals for the future. The other thing is that I get a good consistency of flavour across different batches. So listed down below, I have the recipe for my standard quantity that will give me about 24 or so bowls of soup. I've also put other proportions set for lesser quantities below. And it takes just as long to cook a small batch as it does a large batch, so there's something to consider if you want to have some extra for later. I prefer to leave the skin on the potatoes and the carrots and all the other vegetables where possible. There's extra micronutrients and fibre hiding in all those skins. Melt the butter and add the oil. The butter helps to give a richer flavour. Add the onions and cook them until soft and starting to show some colour. I then add the hard vegetables, one at a time, starting with the carrots. Toss them and let them cook a bit to get some caramelisation showing. This adds to the final flavour. Toss in the potatoes, stir and cook for a short while. Then the celery, stir and cook for a short while. Do this every time you add something extra. Then the green beans, zucchini. At this point, I add the stock. Now, I like a combination of beef stock and chicken stock. If you prefer, just add salt or vegetable stock. The salt or stock will bring out more depth of flavour. I tend to use a combination of beef and chicken stock because the beef stock adds a hardiness to the soup and the chicken stock adds a sweetness. In the final taste, there's no obvious chicken or beef flavour coming through, just a rich, hearty, balanced flavour. Salt or stock needs to be added to suit your taste, and if in doubt about how much to add, then just add a bit at a time until you achieve the flavour balance that you're after. Now we mix and mix. We want to get the hard vegetables hot and starting to cook through. Throw in the cabbage. The cabbage will wilt a bit, but not completely. And each part of the vegetables, like the cabbage, gives a different textural sensation in the mouth when you're eating the soup. Add the silverbeet and stir through. For the tomatoes, I use a combination of crushed and whole Italian tomatoes. I'm trying to balance the addition of tomatoes with not overpowering the soup with a tomato soup flavour. I prefer to add the crushed tomatoes directly to the soup. I put all of the whole tomatoes into a colander and rinse off the excess sauce, and I then cut the tomatoes into chunky pieces. You can crush them with your hands if you prefer. Add the crushed or cut tomatoes to the soup and stir through. At this point, add the cannellini beans, sauce and all. The sauce has extra flavour and it also adds a bit more salt to the mix. And add a heap of water as well. Allow the soup to simmer. Stir it every 15 minutes. And this is where the magic happens. By altering the cooking time, you can have a more watery soup with vegetables with a bit of crunch, or allow the soup to cook for longer and have a more hearty, richer soup with more developed flavour and softer vegetables. After a couple of hours of cooking, it should look like this. At the point when I'm happy with the consistency of the soup, I'll adjust the seasoning again if necessary. At this point, I usually tend to add salt rather than more stock, and it just fine-tunes the flavour. I add freshly grated Parmigiano Reggiano, otherwise known as Parmesan cheese. For a bit of extra flavour, you can add a segment of Parmesan rind into the soup whilst cooking. It won't dissolve completely, but it will give and impart some wonderful depth of flavour to the soup. You'll remove that rind before serving the soup, of course. The vegetables I've used in this soup, you can use as a base. You can add or subtract whichever you like. It's a very tasty soup. Just remember that the slightly longer that you leave it to cook, the more depth of flavour this soup's going to have. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please hit the like and subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified of when we upload new videos. My name's Andrew from Food Good. Thanks for watching.